Today at the National Press Club, Greg Combet. Mr Combet is chair of the government's new Net Zero Economy Authority. The new agency has been tasked with working with those communities most exposed to the green energy transition on Australia's pathway to net zero. Greg Combet with today's address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. My name is Julie Hare. I'm a director of the club here and I'm the education editor at the Australian Financial Review. Our guest today is Greg Combet AM, the chair of the Net Zero Economy Agency, and has been so since July 2023. He will complete his term in the middle of the year. He will become then the chair of the Future Fund. The clean energy and net zero debate is at the forefront of government policy and the Australian community. Mr Combet has had an extensive career in public life and incredibly well resumed to do the job. Sorry about that. Prior to this role, he recently served as the chair of IFM Investors and Industry Super Australia. Mr Combet was formerly Minister for Climate Change and Energy Efficiency, Minister for Industry and Innovation, Minister for Defence Personnel, Science and Material, and a leader of the Australian Council of Trade Unions. Prior to 2007, Mr Combet had a long and high-profile trade union career that involved numerous industry restructurings. Mr Combet was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia in 2006 for service to industrial relations. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on Twitter or X, where our handle is @PressClubAust, or you can use the hashtag NPC. Please welcome Greg Combet.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we stand here today at the Press Club, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people both here at the Press Club and amongst the wider audience. There's quite a few familiar faces here today. Thank you to everyone for coming to the club, and thanks to those who've come in continuance of this long journey in climate policy. Today, as Julie pointed out, I address you as chair of the Net Zero Economy Agency, and a position I took up in July last year and which I will conclude on the 31st of May. On the 1st of June, also as Julie mentioned, I'll begin a new role as chair of Australia's Future Fund, a real privilege. By that time, though, I aim to have discharged the responsibilities that the Prime Minister and the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, asked me to undertake. And they were to build a new statutory authority, the Net Zero Economy Authority, that will promote the orderly and positive economic transformation of Australia as the world cuts greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuel dependence. Also, to ensure that workers and regions are supported through this process and realise and share the benefits and opportunities of the new net zero economy, and to help Australia become a renewable energy superpower. And my instructions from the boss were clear. Develop a plan that will help people and communities through change, respect their interests, create opportunities and leave no one behind. And to me, they're the best of Australian values, and when we're facing significant change, it's important we draw upon them. To go about this task, I've drawn on every bit of my experience in the coal industry originally, as a trade union leader, in politics and in government, and as an institutional investor. I've had the privilege also of working with a team of very capable and dedicated public servants, a highly skilled advisory board, and a very supportive PM and Minister in Chris Bowen. The legislation to create the Net Zero Economy Authority was introduced to the House of Representatives last week, and it will, when enacted, replace the agency that I currently head. Today I'd like to outline for you what that authority will do. It will play an important role in one of the most significant economic events in Australian history, and that's the transformation from fossil fuels to an economy powered by renewable energy and clean industries. A lot has changed in the field of climate policy in the decade or more since I served as Minister for Climate Change in the Gillard government. I think that was the last occasion upon which I spoke here. The subsequent global agreement to an emissions reduction target of net zero by 2050 has been transformative. The debate surrounding climate science has largely settled, and a global consensus has emerged that action, serious action, is needed to cut greenhouse gas emissions to address the dangerous impacts of climate change. Lived experience, I think, is having a big influence on people. More frequent and more devastating natural disasters, temperature records set and exceeded, with last year recording the highest average temperatures in 174 years of record keeping. For Australia, I've likened the scale and significance of the net zero transformation to post-war reconstruction, and that's because of our economy's reliance on fossil fuels. In the 2022-23 financial year alone, the total value of Australian coal and liquefied natural gas exports was almost $220 billion. That's more than 30% of the value of our total exports. Taxes and royalties from fossil fuels play a big part in sustaining our standard of living and government service provision. But as the world changes, demand for our fossil fuel exports will of course decline. Countries with net zero commitments represent 97% of the value of Australian exports. Now that's a very significant figure for an emissions-intensive export like ours. So change is coming, and in fact it's well underway. For Australia though, I think this is a story of great opportunity. We are uniquely endowed with abundant renewable energy and mineral resources, a skilled and resilient workforce, engineering and technical capability, large pools of capital. We have a stable investment environment and are a reliable trading partner. And right now, we can seize the chance to use these endowments to secure prosperity for future and current generations. In my role, I've found optimism about the future in the practical action and the positivity and determination of people when visiting Australia's industrial regions. These communities are now readying themselves for the opportunities of a renewable-powered economy. And that's a different story to the time when I was Climate Minister and travelling around the regions 10 or 12 years ago. Governments, businesses and investors are making concrete plans for a low emissions future. To me, the economic argument is simple. As our trading partners pursue their own emissions reduction targets and wealth from our fossil fuel exports decline, we must create new sources of wealth from industries powered by renewable energy, and at the same time support people, workers, communities and regions through this change. And there's absolutely no doubt about our collective capacity to do it and do it well. The Australian Government has been putting in place the policy and legislative frameworks to set Australia up for success. Minister Bowen has been leading a significant amount of work to deliver the government's policy measures, which include a legislated emissions reduction target of 43% by 2030 and net zero by 2050, a scheme to dramatically expand the deployment of renewable energy and energy storage, enabling 82% renewable energy supply by 2030, $20 billion to build the poles and wires, taking renewable energy to the cities and the regions, legislated obligations to reduce emissions at Australia's largest industrial facilities by 5% a year, decarbonisation plans that are being developed for key sectors of the economy, a $2 billion program to kickstart green hydrogen production, a multi-billion-dollar program to develop critical minerals, new vehicle efficiency standards, climate risk and greenhouse gas and energy reporting to keep companies transparent and accountable for reducing emissions, and government financing mechanisms to help drive investment in the energy transformation. And there's a lot more. The government will lay out the next phase of its approach in the May budget, which will look to capitalise on Australia's comparative advantage in minerals and renewable energy, aiming to encourage large-scale investment in green industrial production. Now, that's all just at the Australian government level. Every state and territory has also committed to net zero emissions and energy transformation and clean industry and jobs plans. And Australian and international businesses and investors are all looking at ways of decarbonising their operations and developing new green production opportunities. All of that activity represents a need for coordination, which is one of the functions of the new Net Zero Economy Authority. Over the past 9 or 10 months, we've met numerous governments, businesses, investors, unions, regional organisations and stakeholders to get that coordination work underway, to make sure that policies are complementary, not working against each other. The task is to try to get everything heading in the same direction, to use resources efficiently, all with a common purpose. The authority won't take on roles of existing government agencies. It will complement, coordinate, identify gaps and contribute to policy development. This is still, in fact, an early stage in Australia's net zero transformation. There's a decades-long journey ahead, and it's important to bear that in mind when we read about the current social licence issues, planning problems or supply chain constraints. These are all substantial problems that need to be tackled, there's no doubt. The cross-cutting nature of these challenges means that we need new ways of working across governments, in particular with our state and territory colleagues. We need to work in an integrated way, thinking beyond our individual remits to recognise the interconnectedness of the problems at hand. But significant progress is being made and people are coming together. The energy transition is the catalyst. Renewable energy generation is the key to economic transformation. Much of our coal-fired energy generation infrastructure is in fact nearing the natural end of its life. We could spend an estimated $400 billion to renew it, or we could invest in a future with renewables. The well-being and security of future generations presents a very obvious path in response to that choice. More than $45 billion has already been invested in renewables just since 2017. Renewables now make up almost 40% of our total energy generation last year in 2023, well over double from 2017. When I was Minister, renewables were only 12 or 13%, just 12 years ago, 12 or 13% of our total generation. So things are changing. And of course, it's not just large-scale generation supply. 3.7 million Australian households currently generate their own solar power, accounting for an average of around 11% of Australia's electricity last year. And incentives on the demand side to drive more rooftop solar and home and community battery storage, of course, have a role to play. But to transform the economy, large-scale generation is fundamentally important, and the state and territory governments are pushing hard on this front as well. South Australia, for example, has gone from almost no renewable energy to 74% in just 16 years. Victoria and Queensland have set ambitious emissions targets and have plans to replace coal-fired generation. New South Wales and other states, of course, are on the same track. The fact is that the energy transition is well underway and is set to accelerate. And the transition is central to the work of the Net Zero Economy Authority when it kicks off. It will focus on the coal-fired power stations and emissions-intensive regions of the country. They are where the impact of change can be felt the most, but they are also where new investment and job opportunities can also be realised. Gladstone and Central Queensland is an example I often refer to. It's a region we've been working in. It's an economic and industrial powerhouse. It produces over 40% of Queensland's energy. It's home to almost half of Australia's coal mines and more than a fifth of Australian miners. It's a major producer of key industrial products like cement, aluminium and ammonia. And it's a major trade hub, with the Port of Gladstone facilitating tens of billions of dollars of trade every year in exports of coal, gas and aluminium to our trading partners. But all of this heavy industry means the region's also one of the most emissions-intensive places in the country, producing over a third of Queensland's emissions. And in my view, successfully transforming the region around Gladstone and similar regions around the country must be a key national endeavour, and to do it, we've got to support the people, the communities and the region through that process. Because it's the people who matter, the families and the communities, the tens of thousands whose livelihoods depend upon coal mining, coal-fired power stations and emissions-intensive businesses. Now, these are people I've represented for much of my working life. There's a number of former union colleagues here today and a table of mining and energy union colleagues. They understand exactly the challenge that's faced, and they are the workers that they represent and the workers in the regions around the country that have squarely been in mind while we've been designing the new authority. It will support them through a period of change, to acquire skills, to access new employment if needed, to help create jobs in new businesses and industries. And the touchstone will be how well we handle the closure of coal-fired power stations. The legislation for the authority introduced into Parliament last week contains an important measure to support those workers through a redeployment scheme. We've called it the Energy Industry Jobs Plan. Power station operators already have plans to help workers in the lead-up to closures. They're mature businesses. The authority will work with those energy companies and the unions representing the workers to complement those plans, meeting with the workers on the ground to understand their needs, connecting them with training, financial advice and other individual supports, helping their transition to alternative jobs, and by offering participation in a redeployment scheme. We'll meet with large nearby businesses and discuss what employment opportunities they have or that could be generated through measures like offering early retirement to existing workers. Workers from the closing power station will then be connected with employment opportunities with another employer in the same or a similar industry. We'll try to align people with jobs available in new clean industries. And the authority will coordinate across all of the different players, the state and local governments, TAFEs, unions and businesses, to get the best outcomes for those workers and the communities. And we'll continue, of course, to work with Jobs and Skills Australia to understand the emerging and future skills required in those regions. The transformation's also an opportunity to improve the way governments work with First Nations communities, to better respect their rights, their knowledge of the land and water where economic activity occurs. There's a real opportunity for First Nations people to be involved in and inform new investments, training opportunities, business and infrastructure to ensure the benefits of the transformation are better shared than they have been in the past. Opportunities for First Nations people to be full and genuine partners in the transformation. First Nations groups are already grasping these opportunities. In March, the Aboriginal Clean Energy Partnership received a $1.6 million government funding for a First Nations-led feasibility study for a massive green hydrogen project in Western Australia. And so one of the functions of the new authority will be to develop these partnerships with First Nations people. But businesses, unions, communities and local governments in the regions are all thinking about the opportunities that lie in the change ahead. Investment will unlock them. and the prospects are immense. To go back to my Central Queensland example, the state already has 52 large-scale renewable energy projects planned or operating, representing more than $11 billion of investment, and it's growing. Industry is thinking about how they can use that renewable energy to replace coal-fired power and reduce the emissions in their operations. We've been doing a lot of work with Rio Tinto, and Rio recently signed Australia's biggest renewable energy deals to power its Boyne aluminium smelter in Gladstone with solar and wind energy. That single aluminium smelter currently contributes more than 5% of Queensland's emissions. If that smelter converts to firmed renewable power, it will not only make a material difference to emissions reduction, but sustain hundreds of jobs, and it's currently a key focus of our work. There's also in Gladstone the CQH2 project, which has brought together Japanese and Singaporean partners with the Queensland Government to develop Queensland's largest renewable hydrogen project. Green hydrogen can be a future energy export, as well as attracting new industry. Orica in Gladstone is planning to use green hydrogen to develop ammonia for its fertiliser and explosives facility in the region, and to expand it and to focus more on exports. Fortescue is building a 50 megawatt green hydrogen electrolyser plant in Gladstone. Japanese firm Sumitomo plans a hydrogen plant at Rio Tinto's Yarwun alumina refinery to help decarbonise those operations. And all that's just some of the plans and the work underway. Gladstone and Central Queensland's proud history as an industrial powerhouse means it has the existing infrastructure and the skilled workforce to take up the opportunities in emerging green industries. Green hydrogen, green metals, green manufacturing. There are opportunities like this in other industrial regions around the country, whether it's the Hunter in New South Wales, Collie in southwest Western Australia, South Australia's Upper Spencer Gulf, or the Latrobe Valley in Victoria. The South Australian Government recently announced their State Prosperity Project, a coordinated initiative to unlock the full potential of renewable energy, minerals and green manufacturing in the Upper Spencer Gulf. The authority, or the agency I currently head, is currently working with the Premier and the South Australian Government to realise those opportunities. There's innovation coming out of the Hunter region, like the collaboration between AGL Energy and Fortescue to transition the Liddell and Bayswater coal-fired power stations into the Hunter Energy Hub, bringing renewable energy generation and associated industries together. Just last week, the Prime Minister, of course, announced a $1 billion program in support of local solar manufacturing while he was at the Liddell Power Station site. There's also a plan between Orica and Origin Energy to develop hydrogen on Kooragang Island in the Port of Newcastle, or the transition of Australia's largest aluminium smelter, Tomago, to renewable energy that's in the Hunter region. And if you look over at the Pilbara, Rio Tinto and BHP in conjunction with BlueScope Steel are looking at an electric smelting furnace to decarbonise iron production. Engie, French company, is building one of Australia's largest hydrogen electrolyser projects at the Yarra fertiliser plant near Karratha. Korea's largest steel producer, POSCO, is proposing to invest $28 billion in green hydrogen and $12 billion in green steel in the Pilbara region. And when offshore wind gets underway in Bass Strait, the Latrobe Valley will face the best economic opportunities, and it deserves it too, seen in many decades. If we can do that well, Australia has the opportunity to develop numerous clean industrial projects, securing billions of investment dollars and providing thousands of jobs. The Net Zero Economy Authority is putting together a pipeline of these projects and will be figuring out how to help bring them to concrete investment decisions. Hundreds of billions of dollars in investment will be needed to achieve net zero. And the fact is, neither government funding nor private capital alone can meet that challenge. It will take both working together to secure the opportunities of Australia's net zero future. For government, this means providing the policy context and direction that will encourage business to invest. The United States, as many of you would be aware, has changed the game in this regard. The US Inflation Reduction Act makes hundreds of billions of dollars available to incentivise investment in clean energy technology and industrial processes. Other countries are now following suit. The EU, Korea, Japan, they're all making unprecedented investments in their industrial base. The race is on to secure industries of the future, and Australia needs to respond and is doing so. And while we can't go toe-to-toe on investment with countries like the US, one thing is abundantly clear. Australia has a compelling comparative advantage in our abundance of renewable energy and mineral resources, plus our skilled workers and reliability as an investment destination and trading partner. These advantages can be harnessed to develop industries that will diversify our economy and locate Australia in low-carbon global markets. And the government has identified 4 initial priority areas for building Australia's net zero economy: refining and processing critical minerals, supporting manufacturing of energy generation and storage technologies, including batteries, producing renewable hydrogen and its derivatives like ammonia, and forging green metals, all underpinned by cheap renewable energy. The authority will have the important job of helping catalyse the investment needed to get those transformational projects and initiatives off the ground. The sorts of things we've been looking at are utility and infrastructure projects like water desalination, solar farms, pipelines and port upgrades, pumped hydroelectricity, wind farms and electricity transmission and distribution. It can also include new batteries, hydrogen, green metals and solar manufacturing facilities, or shared manufacturing and processing facilities like refineries for critical minerals, and research and commercialisation initiatives like common use pilot or demonstration plants. The economics of quite a few of these projects are certainly challenging from a private investment standpoint, and they're far from straightforward to reach a final investment decision. Now, the government's already got investment vehicles like ARENA, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the National Reconstruction Fund that help through grants, concessional debt, loan guarantees and sometimes equity investments. But with particularly large transformational projects, my own view is that governments may need to consider being significant equity players, helping to de-risk projects and adopting a long-term view before recovering capital. That's not novel. It's been done before in our economic history, and particularly at moments like this. Developing these projects will also require working closely and collaboratively with our major trading partners, which will likely also be major investors. There's a lot at stake for our key trading and security partners in the net zero transition. Japan and Korea are our largest export markets for coal and LNG. Both have committed to net zero emissions. Japan imports about 90% of its energy needs, and neither Japan nor Korea are endowed with the same renewable energy resources we have here in Australia. To guarantee their energy security, Japan and Korea are natural partners with Australia. As their fossil fuel dependency reduces, we can work with them to replace it with clean energy. It's in our national interest and it's in theirs. Both countries also import Australian iron ore and coking coal to make steel. With the development of a hydrogen industry in Australia, there's an opportunity for them to make green iron here and export it back to Japan and Korea to help them achieve their decarbonisation goals. So while becoming a renewable energy superpower, we can also emerge as a green metals leader by deepening our existing industrial relationships. So the Net Zero Economy Authority's role is to help realise the many opportunities that I have pointed to and to ensure that workers, communities and our regions share the benefits. It's been a privilege for me to have been involved thus far, and I sincerely thank, and there's a number of them here today, all of those with whom I have worked. I've had the benefit also of past involvement in large economic events, from a young union official in the 1980s with tariffs coming down and numerous industry restructurings and tens of thousands of redundancies to negotiate, not a pleasant task. Big industrial disputes, the fight over carbon pricing, also not a pleasant task. Commercial transactions. The most vital thing, though, that I've learnt along the way is the importance of values to guide the way that we go about change. Respecting people, ensuring fair treatment, aiming at equitable outcomes, generating a commitment of common purpose, a sense that we're all in it together. We've endeavoured to embed these values in the new authority through the people we've employed, the policies we've developed, the legislation, the culture and our engagement with the community. I think that will be a key to achieving positive and orderly change. The Treasurer has said that the net zero transformation will define the decade. It may even define this century. It should be a transformation built on the very best of Australian values, and it should deliver significant benefit for future generations. And we can do it, just as countless others have done before us at similar moments of historic change. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you so much for your speech. I'd just like to kick off and ask you a question about skills and how much involvement the authority has in skills, because in order to become a green energy superpower, it's not just about reskilling the workers in existing industries and carbon-intensive industries. It's about creating a pipeline of skills for the future. I mean, for instance, in Australia at the moment, and for years, we've had a huge undersupply of homegrown engineers, and there's no way that we can see our way out of that other than importing them. On top of that, young people, particularly women, are notoriously conservative about their choice of future careers. And universities and TAFEs are notoriously slow in developing niche skills for new industries. So we kind of have a chicken and egg situation here. So could you just talk me through how the development of skills and workforces in rural and regional areas in particular fit into the authority? Sorry.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, of course. So the government, one of the things the Albanese government did upon coming to office was to set up an organisation called Jobs and Skills Australia. It's already done a significant piece of work to scope out the skills needed for the net zero economy. So there's a sound piece of work for us to rely upon, and we'll work, when I say we, the authority will work closely with Jobs and Skills Australia in the period ahead. Our initial priority has been to get this new authority set up and get the legislation formulated and do as much consultation as we can with stakeholders in the various regions and in business and unions around the country. But skills will be an increasingly important focus as we get into the work with the regions and we start to see some of the changes that I've pointed to. Clearly we need to equip the workforce for what's necessary in the years ahead, and there'll be a significant focus on that.
Okay, first question, Jacob Grebe, Australian Financial Review.
Thank you, Julie. Jacob Grebe, Financial Review. Excellent speech, terrific sort of insight from your end.
You should stop there,
Much
Jacob.
appreciated. That's as nice as I'll get. No, it's a good speech. So as a country, I guess the government and voters have made a decision that there's no future for coal-fired power in this country. You've now established what you're saying is this focus on energy industry jobs plans. Some in business are worried about the involvement of Fair Work Commission in that. They see that as a sort of, I guess, a sort of threat over the top of them. We're talking about a very small number of companies here. They're very well-known companies, they're publicly listed, they have social licence focus themselves, and critically, you're relying on them to be part of the transition to renewables. What's the logic behind that? That almost sets it up as an adversarial thing, when I think the tone of your speech is really that you want it to be a cooperative thing.
Oh, and I'm sure it will be. Sorry, is that the...
Yeah, I was going to indulge Julie and ask a second one, but I'll wait.
Okay. No, I'm sure it will be a collaborative effort, and it's designed to try to achieve that. And yes, the energy companies, some representatives here today, I think, of course, are large, mature businesses with sophisticated human resource management systems and are all wanting to do the right thing. They've got closure dates in mind that are well known publicly, but we have to think not just about them and their business. It's important to think about the workers who are involved, who work for those companies, and the many other workers in these regions where the power stations are located, whose jobs also depend upon the power station at the moment. They might be working in a coal mine that provides thermal coal. They might be maintenance contractors, cleaning contractors, and many others, small businesses in a region that depend upon the activity that's generated by the power station in the area. And we've tried to think very carefully about their interests as well as the interests of the companies involved, consult with them, and come up with a framework that we think will provide for good collaboration to ensure that everyone's interests are attended to. But, you know, I pointed a bit to my own experience in the past, and a number of the others here who've been through this as trade union officials representing workers at times where there's been restructuring would attest to it also. It's not always as smooth as someone might point out in advance. And it's often pointed to, for example, that the closure of the Hazelwood power station in the Latrobe Valley in Victoria was very disruptive. And that was on the back of course, the privatisation of the assets in the 1990s. And there's a lot of scars there. The community has been deeply impacted for a very long period of time. It impacts people's, not only their standard of living, their security, but also things like their house values and the like. And I just think that we have to do a lot better in navigating this period of change and seek the cooperation of the energy companies. It's not meant to be an adversarial setup, but if access to the Fair Work Commission, an institution we've had for 120 years, it's not unfamiliar, if access to the Fair Work Commission is needed because we can't have a perfectly collaborative approach to a power station closure, then it's there as a backup. That's what it's for.
And the follow-up is, how much should the government be carrying that load, the burden of helping those workers versus those companies?
Oh, I think we need a partnership for it to achieve it. Obviously, the energy companies themselves have quite well-developed plans in a number of cases where they're already talking to their individual workers, they're supporting them to go off to do retraining, but where government can assist also to make sure that no one is left behind, that's what we will do.
Rosie Lewis, The Australian.
Thanks, Mr Combet. I have a couple of questions. Will the workers that the authority helps transition be able to earn as much in the clean energy jobs as they do in the traditional industries? Can you tell us that today with any sort of confidence? And does the authority know at this stage what percentage of those workers will actually be able to find new jobs in new industries?
On the latter part of the question, in the work we've done, we've made estimates about these things, but you know, they're estimates, best efforts after consulting widely and thinking about how to construct a redeployment scheme, for example, for power station workers. The test will come with the first closure, and we'll see how well it goes, but we'll put a lot of effort to make that as successful as can absolutely be the case by spending time in the local community, bringing all of the local interests to bear. I used to be a regional MP in the Hunter, for example. It's really important to bring everyone together, get a sense of common purpose, provide as much support as possible, get the local training institutions in particular involved, and encourage other businesses in the region to work with us to help. So I would like to, I'd like to hope that by those genuine efforts will maximise the potential outcome. And now I've forgotten the first part of the question.
Earnings. So will they be able
yes,
to earn
yeah.
as much
I
in
can't
these
say
clean
with
energy
any
jobs?
I can't say with any certainty about that. Obviously, the ambition and the intent is to try and ensure that they are well-paid, secure jobs in the new industries that will emerge. A lot of them are in, as you'll see as I ran through, and I'm sorry if that was a bit laborious, but I wanted to paint the picture that a lot is happening here. There are a lot of plans and there's a lot of investment to be mobilised, and they're in key industrial regions where there's good industrial organisation, there's well understood standards for industrial relations, and I would certainly hope and anticipate that they'll be satisfying and well-paid jobs.
Mike Foley, Sydney Morning Herald and Age.
Thanks, Mr. Combet. You said that the race is on essentially for global capital to fuel this, to fund this transition, I should say. And you also mapped out that there would be a role for government to invest taxpayers' money, as part of an equity stake in some projects that are going to fuel that transition. What I'm interested in is clean investors say with, global books, the serious global players, that a key indicator to them of which jurisdiction they'll prefer for large-scale investment hinges on the climate target and the scale of ambition that a government is pursuing. Obviously, the Albanese government in coming months even will look to set a 2035 climate target. Feel free to give us an exact number, but what sort of ambition do you think that the Albanese government needs to set in reference specifically to that financial imperative, that investment imperative?
Well, I would argue that a 43% emissions reduction target by 2030, only 5.5 years away, is actually pretty ambitious. In an emissions-intensive economy like ours, and that's always important to bear in mind. It's a significant adjustment to make in our economy over quite a finite period of time. So any government thinking about these issues, and it's not my responsibility, to be proselytising about potential 2035 targets, but any government thinking about this obviously wants to be ambitious in target setting, but also has to be very mindful of the economic reality in our own country, and to ensure that we have the support of the community in pursuing change of this nature. And that's an important part of the authorities' work, to try and make sure that we've got a good handle on what's going on at a local level in a region where we've got power stations and emissions-intensive businesses, and be able to bring that back into the policy setting discussion. But 2050 net zero, I suspect I won't be around, but a lot of you will be. That's a fairly finite period of time to make an enormous adjustment to our economy, and the government will go about, I'm sure, thinking about the next set of targets to submit in the international community very carefully.
Dan Jervis-Bardi from the West Australian.
Thanks for your speech, Mr. Combet. Can I ask about nuclear? Has the agency up to this point done any work looking at the possibility of workers in the coal sector potentially transitioning to a nuclear industry? And also, as you've travelled around the country to places such as Gladstone, have you detected any sense of willingness from those communities to potentially embrace nuclear as one of the options for a future energy industry?
On that part, I haven't heard the word mentioned as I've travelled around. And on the former part of your question, I think has been traversed quite recently. The Howard government legislated nuclear out of the equation in 1998, I think it was, and it's been a bipartisan policy position since that time. And unless and until that changes, I wouldn't waste a minute of the authority's time on it. You know, governments need to make a policy decision about that. If there is to be a decision made, we need to focus on the reality that's in front of us right now.
Do you, if you mind, would it be prudent for the authority to look at it into the future, given the length of time that it would take to potentially stand up a nuclear industry in Australia? Do you think it would be prudent for them to look at the possibility, given the impacts of if coal-fired power stations were to close and the potential consequences of not having that transition plan? Do you think it's worth at least considering it?
Well, it's a matter for government to determine whether that 1998 piece of legislation prohibiting nuclear is turned over. If that happens, then obviously the authority has to think, okay, what does that mean for the work of the authority and the functions that it has? But also, as has been well traversed, I think, in recent times, it doesn't look particularly economically feasible either. So I'd be surprised if it's overturned in a hurry.
Can I just interrupt there? Just, you know, the flip side of nuclear is solar panels. Australia is a very small producer of solar panels and at much greater expense here than those made in China and the US. But the government made a big splash of its $1 billion solar sunshot at Liddell Power Station in the Hunter Valley. The Australian Financial Review editorialised, describing it as a flight of fancy, and said that it was all about, you know, signalling to the community it was about green jobs, but whether these green jobs would ever eventuate was another thing. Can you just speak to me about solar panel manufacturing, whether it is feasible in Australia, given our high cost?
I'm not an expert on solar manufacturing. However, the little that I actually know is that there are quite a lot of steps in a value chain to get to a solar panel. So, you know, what's being examined here is, are there steps along the way in that value chain, for example, with silicon production? That's a componentry in solar cells. Are there steps along the way where Australia has a comparative advantage, where we can use our mineral resources and other endowments that I described when I was speaking to be competitive internationally and to manufacture those components, if not a full solar panel? So the program that was announced last week by the Prime Minister and Minister Bowen is aimed at that. There's to be a period of consultation with all of the various players in that industry, including resources companies, I would imagine, to identify, and it'll be conducted by ARENA, the Renewable Energy Agency, to identify just where the best place for the disposition of any funding from that program may best occur, you know, to assist the development of that industry in Australia. But I think, as Professor Rod Sims remarked in the Fin this morning, we're going to need a lot of solar panels. Right? And if we can find a place to have a sovereign capability that's competitive and plays to our comparative advantages, that's common sense policy as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thank you. Sarah Tomevska from SBS.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Mr. Combet. I wanted to pick up on something you were saying at the end of your speech about the need for government investment, but also to work closely with our trading partners. Are you indicating an openness, for example, to work with Japan and South Korea to underwrite a green hydrogen industry in Australia in exchange for a guarantee export, for example?
I don't know that I was pointing to guarantees, but if you just think about it from Japan and Korea's point of view, they're currently importing a lot of energy. You know, Japan, 90% of its energy needs, coal and liquefied natural gas. They've committed to net zero. What do they do over the next 25 years? That's got to come down, and that affects us as the major exporter to them. So their imports of fossil fuels has to come down. They have to replace it with alternative energy sources. What they are looking at in relation to Australia is, as a reliable national security and trading partner for many years, you know, should they be investing here in green hydrogen development and perhaps derivatives of hydrogen like ammonia as the alternative, or at least one of the alternative energy sources upon which they can rely in the decades to come. And that's why they're looking at Gladstone and other places. It's why POSCO is looking at the Pilbara. You know, it similarly means that it may make more sense for them, rather than to do all of the iron production and steel manufacturing in their home country, to do some of that process here. For example, given the difficulties transporting green hydrogen at this point in time, then perhaps it's best using the renewable resources here, develop the green hydrogen, use that in direct reduction iron technologies, and then send the green iron back to Japan and Korea for steel production. That's the nature of the equation, and what I'm trying to point to is that if we work closely with our established trading partners like Japan and Korea, it's in their national interest, a partnership of that nature, and it's in our national interest. And that discussion is well underway, and that's why there are the projects that I pointed to.
Brandon Howe, Innovation Oz.
Thanks very much, Mr. Combet, for your address today. Just a question on the legislation for the authority. Last week, in the legislation, it says that the Prime Minister will have the power to direct it by a legislative instrument, and one of its main functions will be to refer matters to the various investment bodies such as the National Reconstruction Fund Corporation and the CEFC. Just wanted to ask you, is there a risk here that the boards of those respective investment agencies will their ability to make independent investment decisions be compromised at all? And just to pick up on a point from your speech, are you able to talk through the extent that the agency so far has had in helping the government formulate those budget measures for investment in green industrial production that we are expecting?
So on the former part of the question, that's an important point to draw out. So thank you for that. The answer is no. There's no risk, compromising the independent governance of the various financing bodies. They have had, however, a number of them, a net zero objective inserted into their statements of expectations and possibly their investment mandates. And as you point out, the authority will have, would have the right to do so in any event, but to consult with them. And what we've had in mind in that regard is respecting their investment mandate, their independence, but being in a position to take to them a project such as one of the ones that I've briefly described, and to say, listen, does this, in the investment case we've worked up, does this fit with your mandate? Would it fit within your portfolio? Is the ticket too big? And engage in a discussion to see if some form of government engagement through, concessional debt, an equity investment potentially, a loan guarantee, whether there's some form of instrument that could help catalyse an investment to take place. But it's certainly not intended to compromise their independence or their investment mandate as it currently stands. And on the point of the Prime Minister directing the authority, it's for a minister, he'd be the Minister for the authority, the PM. It's of a general nature. The board of the authority will be able to make its own mind up about these things, obviously take account of the general directions that might be provided by the PM and respond accordingly. But strategy and operational control of the authority rests with the board and the chief executive under the legislation. I'm sorry, the second part of the question.
Yes, the second part on, you mentioned that we're expecting large-scale investment in green industrial production in the budget.
Yeah.
To what extent, or could you describe the work that's already taken place through the agency to support that?
Well, all I'm in a position to say in relation to that, since those are matters for Cabinet to determine and then to announce, is that the agency has been a participant in the policy discussion.
Thank you.
Ron Misen, Financial Review.
Thank you, Mr. Combet. I'm hoping that, perhaps on behalf of Morris here, that we'll get you back next year in the Future Fund role, and it'll make it 4 for 4. You might break a record in terms of the number of speeches, in terms of you've appeared in your different capacities. But thinking about that capacity of leading the Future Fund, which you'll take over very soon, are there any ideas or things that you've learnt in your role with IFM, with the authority, with ISA, that you want to take into that in terms of that mobilisation of capital, and does the Future Fund have a role? And then just with your IFM hat on, do you think that the best financial interest test for super funds needs to be altered in order to allow them to really unlock their capital and participate in the renewable transition?
I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you, Ron. I can't really answer those. I don't have an IFM hat on anymore, but obviously I hope that I've learnt something in the course of my experience with IFM and in my other roles in the past that I can take with me to the Future Fund that will be of some utility. But until such time as I start there and have some time to familiarise myself with the team and the other board members and the portfolio, and have a single focus on the delivery of the investment mandate, I won't say anything more about it at this stage. So I'd be happy to talk after I'm in the role.
Thanks for the best financial interest test for super funds. You managed a lot of capital, or oversaw a lot of capital in that time. I mean, you'd have an idea about those thresholds for being able to deploy that.
Yes, but I'm not here in that capacity, so if you'll forgive me, I'll leave that to the advocates in the industry.
Thank you.
I might just interject here. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about big super funds, think Hester, pushing for directors to be put onto the boards of publicly listed companies, think Woodside.
I'm not here to prognosticate about that either, Julie. I'm sorry.
Don't have any...
I've got lots of views, but I'm in a public service capacity today, so I'll stick to my remit.
Okay, Jacob Griever, good luck.
I'll give it one more go. I'll do it in a different way, though. You've talked about the significant equity participation that would be involved.
Yeah.
Could you quantify that?
No, I can't quantify it.
I mean, are we talking hundreds of millions, tens of billions? I mean, you must have a sense of what it'll take to get this moving.
Yeah,
and I guess a follow-up question to that is, this whole thing that you've built, what does success ultimately look like for this authority? And I know this is a town that loves to create more bureaucracy, but in a sense it's a transition authority. Does that mean you've got a sunset clause on this thing?
There's no sunset clause in the bill, but if it does its job successfully over the next 25 or 30 years, I could imagine someone thinking, job done, don't need that anymore. That's a possibility that it would emerge. Look, it's just a very significant investment task, Jacob, and ideally institutional investors, private capital would see the opportunities in it and make commercial judgments and invest. And they are, where they can see that making sense. But there are, I can see occasions and projects in this particular transformation where government's going to need to play a role. And as I said earlier, that's not novel. Electricity infrastructure in the past has been virtually all public infrastructure. It's only been privatised in more recent decades, some of it. Interestingly enough, in Queensland, where much, if not nearly all of it, is still in public hands, the Queensland government's in a better position to be able to coordinate the transformation there and the deployment of renewables and the reinforcement of the grid. It's a tough challenge for private investors, this particular circumstance. I mean, you can't just suddenly go and stick a pole and wire up somewhere or a new renewable project somewhere without all of the attendant connection issues, planning issues, social licence questions. So You know, we will have to work through these questions in coming years where it's proving difficult for something that's clearly in the public interest, a particular project, to take place, and government's having a good look at it and considering whether or not there is a role for government to provide concessional debt or an equity investment to help de-risk a project. That'll have to be done in a disciplined and rigorous way, because no one wants to deploy taxpayers' money unnecessarily. But you can see that a partnership in some particularly significant transformative projects is likely going to be necessary.
Sounds like the Future Fund's the perfect vehicle.
I wouldn't prognosticate upon such a thing. Look, going to the Future Fund, and obviously, you know, I take it very seriously, it's got an investment mandate that government has determined. Going in as chair of the Future Fund, that's what I have to deliver, and that's all I'll be focused on.
Thanks.
Rosie Lewis.
I'm just hoping, Mr Combet, you can paint a picture of the task at hand for the authority. Over the 25-30 years, can you give a hard estimate as to how many workers it's going to have to help transition into new jobs, and how quickly do they need to start transitioning? Does the authority need to be legislated by July, for example, so the transition can start next year?
Well, I'd like to see it legislated by the Parliament as soon as possible, and ideally, if it is possible, so that it can be stood up from the 1st of July, but that's a pretty tight time frame. But whatever it is, as near as possible to that date is desirable so that it can get underway. In the meantime, however, the agency, that we've built up and continue to build is functioning, and we'll get on with the job. Look, quantifying the number of people that will need support, that's a very difficult thing to answer. What we do know is that certainly by mid the 2030s, 10, 11, 12 coal-fired power stations are going to be closing. There's several thousand workers directly impacted by that. Then on top of that, you've got workers who may be employed in what we call a captured coal mine. That is, their only customer is the power station. You know, there's basically a conveyor belt from the coal mine into the power station, and it doesn't have other infrastructure to take it to market. And we've got a pretty good idea of all of those circumstances, and that's what we'll focus on initially. We're still going through a process at the moment of developing the particular support packages that I spoke about briefly in the speech for workers, not just in those power stations and associated businesses, but in regions generally where assistance may be necessary. But look, the idea here is to minimise job losses and to help business decarbonise existing emissions-intensive businesses and protect jobs and make sure they're internationally competitive businesses so they're sustainable jobs. That's the idea.
And to clarify, does the transition start next year or more in 5-10 years once the closures?
It's underway now. You know, we've had 10 or 11 power stations close since 2010, I think. It's been underway for a while, but it's going to accelerate.
And our final question is Maurice Riley, Chief Executive of the National Press Club.
Thanks, Julie. I'm just wondering whether you're missing Canberra. I'm wondering whether, Labor government in, and you were very much part of it, whether you've got any sort of future ambitions. Is there any batten in the knapsack?
Well, thank you so much, Maurice. Can I just say what a pleasure it is to see you again, and for you to have me back here. It's very enjoyable, and to see so many familiar faces, it's great. I'm having my sort of Canberra reverb at the moment, enjoying it very much. But I'll be happy to move into the Future Fund's offices in Melbourne and Sydney in a couple of months' time.